Howdy folks, Shell Presto DiBaggio here, awesome artist, remarkable writer, and undaunted luminary of my time. As you probably saw in the thumbnail, we're doing some more Dungeons & Dragons style RPG art today, so that means we're going to have another tabletop role-playing chat today. So it's another threefold video. We're going to talk about creating characters in your tabletop RPG, my best advice for it, and that could be used at the start of a game if you're a brand new player, or if you're just starting another game, or of course what to do if your character dies mid-game. We'll talk a little bit about the drawing process for what I'm working on, and a little bit of art chat, and of course we will also do some fluff, some information about the character I'm drawing. But before we get into all of that, let me just tell you what you're going to be looking at while I'm talking. This character is named Bulwark. He is originally from our Challenger Confidential book series, the first book of which is Copper Knights and Granite Men. I think it's a little obvious about the Granite Men part of the story as this character and drawing comes together. But this being an old school RPG type drawing, we've medieval fantasized him the way that I always do for my, you guessed it, Bexim's Bazaar illustrations. This illustration was done months ago and appeared in an issue of Bexim's Bazaar before it appeared anywhere else. Bulwark has super strength and ultra dense stone skin, so when figuring out what to pit him against for an awesome action illustration, I thought it would be pretty funny to have him fighting a Medusa. So we will also be drawing a generic Medusa in this drawing as well. Okay, so character creation is one of those things that I think people often spend entirely too much time on when they are new to playing RPGs. I know that I certainly spent too much time on it when I first started playing in high school. And I started playing with D&D 3.5, and you spent so much time on character creation, and you know, rolling stats is a normal thing, but then like you were picking skills, and you were picking feats, and you were character creation took a day in and of itself. It was like a session. It was like a gaming session, but you didn't game. You just sat there reading the book and going through, you know, what weapons you wanted and everything else like that. And our DM, of course, encouraged us to come up with backstories for our characters and our pasts, and you know, tell him some things so that he could weave that into a character. And sometimes I'd spend like an entire week thinking about all this and jotting it down and writing out long bios for my characters before I even sat down to play the game. And there's a couple reasons why you really don't want to go through all of this. First and foremost is, if you're not used to playing Dungeons & Dragons, it's exceptionally easy to die in Dungeons & Dragons. And maybe the newer games try to alleviate this a bit, or some dungeon masters don't tell you they won't let your characters die, but some dungeon masters will just be nice and not let your characters die. But my very first time playing D&D, I was the only character that survived. So everyone that had spent all that time creating their characters, there were 2 other characters, and then the DM was also playing a character, so I guess technically there were 3 other characters. 3 other PCs wasted all that time creating their character because they all died in the first session. And that's because I accidentally killed them. But that's a story for another day. And the DM took it really easy on me because he pretty much created a MacGuffin on the fly so that my character could defeat the enemy. And in theory, the idea was that my character would somehow get the other characters revived or healed or something. But we never played with those characters again. And it's hard to get a new, fresh D&D group together and have them stick to a schedule. I ended up creating a lot of characters in high school and early college, and we didn't use them that often. I think often uh, until I started DMing much later in college. All my other sessions, I think we'd get like a max of 2 or 3 sessions in with characters, and then we wouldn't play for months, and then we'd end up starting a new game. So that could very easily happen to you, and then you know, had spent all that time creating characters for no reason. But presto, you ask. I'm supposed to be role-playing. I'm supposed to be someone different. How, how am I supposed to, do an interesting role-playing session and have a compelling character if I don't put a lot of time into it? Well, I have your answer. This is from years of creating characters and running sessions, and here is my best advice for quickly creating an interesting character for your D&D session. Step 1. Pick a character you already like. I mean, any character from anything. It doesn't have to match the class you ended up rolling up or anything like that, but you could. Um, you could go with Captain America for a paladin, or the Thing for a fighter or barbarian or something. But really, you can just use any character you like and know well. And the better you know the character, the more favorite they are, the easier it will be for you to kind of get into role-playing and play and know what they're going to do. Because sometimes when you create a character yourself, you don't have a good beat on their personality and you don't know how they'd react to the situation, and that can slow down and kind of hurt your role-playing a bit too. So yeah, pick anyone. I mean, if you pick Batman, you're kind of going to lean more toward Bruce Wayne or something like that, but you could pick Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, or you could do Charlie Brown or Linus. Actually, Linus would make a pretty awesome wizard, spouting off philosophies and kind of uh, remarking on what everyone does. That could work out really well. You're mainly going for their personality here, so play someone that you think would be fun to play and try to run with their personality. You obviously can't have, well, or unless you have really like a lot of points to put into something, you really can't have their abilities. Like, you can't have laser beam eyes if you're Cyclops or Superman, and you can probably have really high armor if you buy it, but if you want to be Thing, you can't have stone skin or something like that unless you discuss that in advance with the DM and probably take a lot of um, penalties on other things. But the important thing here is that you have a personality. So obviously you want to adjust them for your abilities, and you want to adjust them for the time period. If you're picking, I'm about to date myself here, but Lena Inverse from Slayers or Deedlit from Record of Lodoss War, and you're playing a 30s crime Lovecraft type game like Call of Cthulhu, then you're going to want to adjust them for the time period. Same as if you pick a modern character and have to medieval fantasize them. The same way that I am doing in this exact drawing right now. If you're worried about the character's originality, then you should probably change how they look. You can give them a different hair color, or obviously you might want to give them a race, like make them an elf or a dwarf or a halfling or an orc or whatever other races you can play as nowadays. Although humans are quite interesting to play as, and I enjoy playing them as well. But you want to adjust them. And obviously you want to change their name, because it kind of breaks the in-universe believability if You know, everyone's calling your character Steve Rogers if they're Captain America or Tony Stark or whatever. Uh, you know, you want to give them a Dungeons and Dragons appropriate name like Idris Ale Slugger or Beef Drow Slayer, or something like that. I'm being a little facetious there, but I'm having fun doing it, so. I did a video on writing and creating your own characters that goes into this more, but the thing is, the events that occur in the game are not going to parallel the events that happen to that character in their own universe. You know, Captain America doesn't go fighting orcs or, you know, saving towns from poisoned water supplies that witches caused or things like that. So the in-game events will make your character that you essentially ripped off evolve into their own original character very quickly. And, you know, obviously you hope that your game goes on for a long time. I have friends who have been playing the same character in the same campaign for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. 20 years of different experiences will make your character very original and very quick, even though you, on the fly, you know, took ideas from another character. Because just like real life, it's the events around us that shape who we are. So your, you know, Idris Ale Slugger will be very, very far removed from, you know, Ben Grimm the Thing or Batman or whoever you chose to start your character with. And the important thing is that, you know, you have that ability to evolve over years of playing. But you also didn't spend a lot of time in case your character dies in the very first session and you have to come up with another character. Although you can always do the thing where you are the brother or sister of your original character who is remarkably similar but a different class. I've totally done that when I died early in sessions. So again, pick a character you already like, change their name, potentially change how they look, adjust them for the stats you rolled and abilities you chose, and the time period that you're going to be playing in, and then just play as them. Alright, let's pause and address the artwork for a second here. This image is coming together really well now. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the later issues I had that you'll be seeing as we go forward. But the big thing that I loved about this image was that I had models for it. I'm lucky enough to have friends, particularly Mike, my husband, and his best friend Russ, who will pose for me. And yeah, Russ got to put Mike in a headlock for this one, so that was really great. But there's two things to say about when you have people pose for you. One is that you need to get them to exaggerate the poses. And Mike and Russ have done this enough for me that they already know. So they went in full force and, you know, arms flailing and everything like that. But whenever you're drawing something, you want to capture a sense of action, and often the way people do things in real life is not, you know, how they'd, it's not very dynamic. So, you know, you really want to encourage people when they're, especially your friends and stuff, when they're modeling for you. Or if you're using yourself in a mirror or taking a photo of yourself by, you know, setting your phone across the room, make your actions really big. You know, spread your arms wide, twist your hips. You know, you can see I didn't have to exaggerate Mike's arm motions for the Medusa. He had his arms up and flailing like that for the picture. And especially when you turn a camera on people, they tend to sort of like close up or close in on themselves. So, especially if they're a good friend, you know, make get in there and pose their arm for them and ask them to hold it. But don't ask them to hold it too long, or else they'll never want to take photos with you again. The other big thing, and I think that this image states that well, is that you don't need to have characters that match the body type or even the sex of the person or thing or whatever it is you're going to be drawing. You know, use what you have. Mike is not a you know, thin, slinky-looking female with scale skin, but the human skeleton is about the same for everyone. I mean, you know, men have broader shoulders and stuff like that, but you adjust that when you are actually doing the drawing. So I can totally have Mike pose for a small female or a you know, giant man or the Hulk or anything like that. Likewise, well, Russ is a pretty big guy. He's not that far off from Bulwark's body type, but still, you know, he's not 6 foot, or no, Bulwark's 7 foot. He's not 7 feet tall and made of stone, but he'll do. And I've, you know, posed myself for Bulwark, who's 7 feet tall and 3 times the width of me and made of stone. You know, you can use anyone, even yourself, no matter what your body type is, as a reference. Your skeletal structure and the way that you can move is going to be the same. I mean, I can't pull off, say, a Spider-Man pose, but still, you know, anything you can do to help your own drawing helps. Alright, on to my favorite part of these videos, the fluff. My husband and I write and I draw these characters that we create for our Ascension Epoch books, and I love sharing this kind of stuff with you guys. So today is kind of an example of what I was talking about. I've said in a previous video that Bulwark here is pretty much a pastiche of the Thing. You know, he's a big, burly New Yorker with stone skin, and he's on a team that's not entirely unlike the Fantastic Four. Well, how could he be any sort of original character? Well, there's a lot of things that separate him from the Thing. One, the Thing has a lot of angst over his transformation, whereas when Bulwark was transformed into having stone skin, he thought that it was awesome because it opened up a job opportunity that's way better than he was doing in construction work. So he's providing for his family. He gets to move to a, you know, nicer neighborhood and stuff like that. There are a lot of benefits to it. Another thing that differentiates him from the Thing is that before his accident happened, he had a wife and he already had a daughter. So whereas the Thing angsts a lot about being lonely and wondering if he can have kids, Bulwark doesn't have that problem. And playing Bulwark, especially off of his daughter, is a lot of fun. So I'm going to share with you guys a story that we have partially written, not released yet. The opening to it, in which you get to see Bulwark in his home life. This is a modern day story. This is not medieval fantasized like the illustration here, but it's lots of fun. I hope you guys enjoy it. Please let me know if you do. Hey, this is real life. It ain't like professional wrestling where it's all scripted and nobody's worried about getting hurt, you know. And that ain't stage lightning they were slinging around out there. That stuff hurts. Those were real people sticking their necks out there, and they ain't doing it for laughs. Molly Halstein's eyes widened, staring at the unexpected appearance of her father on the TV. Was it a commercial, she wondered, or a glitch at the studio, switching to a news clip? No, right there in the corner of the screen, the logo of the World Grappling Underground still hovered. She dropped her spoon with a splash into the bowl of Choco Puffies as she reached for the remote, turning the volume up. The close-up image of Bulwark's face went on moving, but the audio muted, replaced by the disembodied words of a commentator. Those were the words that set off a firestorm of controversy in the UGW locker room. These were the comments of Pete Halstein, that slab-jawed New York superhero called Bulwark, that many have interpreted as a shot across the bow of professional wrestling. But was it a challenge? Was it the insult that many are taking it as? One thing is for sure, Bulwark's comments have really lit a fire under the trunks of one world-renowned grappler. We now go to the locker room, where Dandy Jim Frisco will ask those questions of the most outspoken man in the sport, Santo Caballero. The screen cut to an image of a lean, mustachioed man dressed like a Texas millionaire holding up a microphone to an even taller and much burlier man who wore a white full-face mask covered in rhinestones and little else. "I know you have a lot to say about Bulwark's recent comments, Santo Caballero," said Dandy Jim with a flourish to his faux Spanish pronunciation. "So let me just hand you this microphone and get out of your way." Molly stared at the screen in a ludicrous expression of surprise. A slurry of chocolate milk and ground corn dribbled out the corner of her lips. "Dad!" she cried as best she could around the mouthful of cereal. "Dad, come in here quick!" But her father's strange, cavernous voice echoed back its rebuke from the kitchen. "If you want to talk to me, you can come in here and speak to me like a civilized human being." But then Mexico's holy night held forth, his voice almost blasting out the speakers of the television, and the young girl knew civilization was at best a hollow facade. "Furia!" Santo Caballero vented the contents of his lungs on that word, and then loudly filled them back up again, his shaved, glistening chest expanding to the circumference of a 55-gallon drum. He angled his head toward the camera, revealing the darting, dilated pupils behind the eyelets of his mask. A wild passion gripped him, restrained only by a few frayed threads of sanity. Molly could not see his cheeks behind the mask, of course, but she knew they must be black with rage. "A righteous anger is what I feel, Dandy Jim, whenever that tape is replayed. And I have replayed it, again and again, seeking out a more generous interpretation of this most honorable man's words. I consulted with the other luchadors, but they were as wroth as me. So I visited my priest, but he could not defend those words. No, he could only say, 'Turn the other cheek.' And so finally I prayed to my dear mother in heaven. 'Madre,' I appealed, 'help me understand those baleful words in some other way.' But Dandy Jim, even her kind and gentle heart, could find no good in those words, and she could only say, 'Son, forgive him.'" And then Santo Caballero raised a trembling hand and slowly bent his fingers into a shaking fist, and the last measure of his strained self-control fled him on a hissing breath. "But, Mama, an insult on my honor, and the honor of Lucha, cannot so easily be forgiven." Molly set down her bowl and leaped across the arm of the couch, screaming into the kitchen. "Dad, you need to get in here and see this! Right now!" China and silver clattered onto the floor, and the walls shook as her father bellowed, "Gosh darn it, Molly! Now I've had it!" He stormed into the room, staring down his rebellious offspring. His angled, stony face was chiseled in a glower of parental opprobrium as he snarled, "What did I tell you about watching TV while we're eating? Turn that off right now! It's not enough I don't get to see you guys so often, but now I have to put up with you disobeying your mom and me, too? This is family time, and family time means Bulwark!" Father and daughter jolted at the shout from the television, and both turned their eyes, the latter in fear and the former in amusement, to the pacing, hyperventilating luchador on the screen. "I respect you, Bulwark, and I respect your compañeros in the Challenger Foundation, the mighty Atomic Ranger, that legendary beauty Meteora, and El Jefe, Don Mancini, wise and gracious, Vencedor de Marte. I do not know you, Bulwark, but I know you must be courageous to be numbered among this pantheon of great warriors." "Hey, what are you watching here?" Bulwark muttered. "And so I wonder, Bulwark, what harm have I done to you that you do not respect me? What crime have I committed that you so dishonor me, and my brothers, and my forefathers? I must know why you dishonor Lucha. If I have done something, then you must come and tell me, man to man, and I will make right. But if I have not, then you must answer for your insults." And here Santo Caballero paused, seething, breathing into the camera with clenched teeth. "Hey, this is some put-on, ain't it?" Bulwark laid his face on his hand, looking from the television to his daughter in bafflement. "It sounds like he's talking to me." "He is!" shouted Molly, jumping onto the couch cushions on the tips of her toes. "Dad, Santo Caballero is calling you out." "Huh? Why?" "Because you said wrestling was fake." "What? Wrestling is fake. Besides, I never said—" One of the luchador's gigantic fists crashed into the other with a loud pop. "Bulwark, man of unyielding stone, you are strong and tough, but you are not strong and tough enough to sneer at lucha. Until you have tested your mettle against the foes I have faced, both inside the ring and outside of it, on the streets of Mexico City or in the stifling, haunted jungles of the Yucatan, you must not speak thus to Santo Caballero. Have you fought for your life against El Hijo de Marte, or with your last strength wrested the championship belt from the bloody hands of Murcielago Azul? Have you overthrown the Cruzab blood drinkers of Chan Santa Cruz? Have you, with your own hands, pulled the steaming heart from the breast of the mummy sorceress of the Temple of Camazotz? Have you ever looked into the eyes of murderous communists before flinging them off the ramparts of Chapultepec? No, mighty Bulwark, you have not done these things, and yet you impugn the honor of lucha. And so, Santo Caballero must call you to account. In 2 weeks, I will return to the Big Apple, and there, Bulwark, if you are a man of honor as I think, you will meet me in Madison Square Garden. There, in the great temple of lucha, you will either apologize or you will battle me, Santo Caballero. And our battle will not cease until there is a final victor." The gigantic wrestler shrugged and sneered. "Or you will flee from my challenge and display your disgrace to the wide world. But I do not think you will do this, Bulwark. I think, in your heart of stone, you yearn to face me. You must prove to yourself that you are worthy of that belt that proclaims you hero. You have fought the Copper Knight, it is true, but you have not faced the Holy Knight. Do you dare accept my challenge?" Bulwark stared gobsmacked at the TV for a moment as the screen shifted to a commercial. At long last, he spoke. "I don't get it." "Your interview after the fight with the neighborhood wardens and that gargoyle, Dad. You said—" And here Molly burst into her best imitation of her father's alchemically altered New York accent. "Hey, this is real life. It ain't like professional wrestling." "That's ridiculous. Talk about taking something out of context. That crumb-bum reporter was insinuating that the fight was all a hoax, that we were—" He shook his head violently and waved his hands, stomping back off into the kitchen. "Forget it. Why are we wasting time talking about this? Get in here and eat breakfast with your dad." "But Dad!" Molly grabbed onto her father's arm and was dragged off the couch by his momentum. "What about the challenge? You're not going to accept it, are you?" Bulwark snorted. "Of course not. I've got real work to do." Molly breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good." Bulwark froze mid-step. He glared down sideways at his daughter. "What do you mean by that?" "I was afraid you'd accept and get hurt. Santo Caballero would tear you apart." "What?" he roared. "Are you kidding me?" Bulwark flexed his stone biceps. "I smashed up the Copper Knight, not to mention all those bozo NPs. That overgrown trick-or-treater wouldn't even scratch my skin." "Dad, are you out of your mind? Santo Caballero is a real superhero. He really did do all that stuff, mummy's heart and all." "And what am I, chopped liver? I run with the Promethean." Molly shrugged. "If you say so, but when's the last time you threw a bunch of commies off a castle?" You're really getting on my nerves, little girl. All I'm saying is that you'd better not call him an overgrown trick-or-treater, or he'll get really mad. Those Mexican super wrestlers take that stuff very seriously. I hope you folks enjoyed that. Mike wrote all or almost all of that scene, and I have to say I really love it. That story's coming along nicely, and it's a lot of fun. We're big fans of Spanish luchador movies, if you can't tell. Also, you might be able to tell, but I'm not particularly good with accents, but hopefully I differentiated my voice enough that you guys can, you know, tell which character was talking when. Consequently, if you want to make fun of my bad and strange accents in the comments, you have my permission. Go for it. Also, I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can read Bulwark's origin story if he seems like an interesting character to you in Challenger Confidential, Copper Knights and Granite Men. You can buy the full illustrated novella, written mostly by Mike, but also by me, and illustrated by me. It's available on Amazon.com, or we're serializing it free over on HeroicAdventureFiction.com, all one word, no spaces. All right, a couple other things about the artwork now that it's further done and you can see a bit more of what I'm talking about. This piece was very texture heavy. Part of the reason for that is that Bulwark obviously is made of stone, and you need to convey that in textures. So I made sure to use a lot of harsh straight lines where I would normally use like softer lines for muscles. The human body is very rounded. Bulwark had to be not. And then when shading, I always try to pick one flat direction with my shading lines to really hit home that he's angular. That actually is one of the reasons he's not my favorite, but one of my top favorite characters to draw. I really like that change and equating squareness and angles to organic shapes. On the other hand, that is awful to color on the computer. With drawing Medusa, again, I had scales everywhere, so that was intensive too. And when you're doing that, you have to really ask yourself, you can put scales everywhere. You can draw each and every scale, but that's super time intensive, and it could draw the eye away from where you want it to be. On the final piece, Medusa on the right and that pillar on the left are the brightest spots. I add screen tones to Bulwark later on. So I didn't want you to focus solely on Bulwark. You needed to know that there was a Medusa there too, and if I made her too dark, that would have ruined that effect. So while I put all the scales on where her legs would be, her snake tail, and shade that in darkly, the top part of her, while it's entirely scaled, I only draw maybe 1/4, maybe 1/3 of the scales, and I leave a lot of white space. The viewer's eye is going to fill in that pattern. They're not going to be like, oh, her scales are falling off. They're going to know, especially if you draw the lines with a little bit of texture to them too. When I say that, I mean like the outlines of her, arms. If you add a little texture to what would be smooth lines of her face and stuff like that, then the viewer is definitely going to fill that in. And finally, there's texture on the pillar on the left. And so when you're an artist, you make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, you don't throw your hands up in the air and say, oh no, this entire piece is ruined, I'm going to not use it, and I'm going to have wasted, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 or however many hours you put into the drawing, hours of my life. When you are an artist and you have a deadline, you look at the mistake and you say either how can I fix it or how can I make that work. With the pillar on the left, I was actually trying to do a marble pattern without using any screen tones. And if I succeeded, I was going to do the same thing on Bulwark, and then I wouldn't use screen tones on him. But that failed miserably. It didn't look like marble at all. It looked like the pillar was kind of dirty, and the mark was there. So I had to run with it. So then I added splotches all over the pillar. And, that makes sense to me, because if you're a Medusa snake woman and no one can look at you or else they get turned to stone, then, yeah, you're not going to have many visitors, and you're probably going to be miserable, and you're not going to clean your house very well. So then I just ran with that. Since the pillar looked dirty, I made the curtain in the back look dirty. I added a little bit of dirt and scuffs to Bulwark from having moved around in there. And I added a couple patches to Medusa to just show she isn't that clean a person. And that meant I needed to use screen tones for the pattern on Bulwark himself to make him look like stone, the marble. And I won't say problem, but when you start using screen tones in one area of your drawing, you need to look hard and make sure that you're not creating imbalance in your drawing for lack of screen tones in other areas. When I used screen tones on Bulwark, all of a sudden it changed how you read the drawing. And in some ways it was nice, because it made Medusa's head stand out more, and her arms, because they were suddenly brighter than Bulwark. But it made Bulwark sort of recede from the curtain and the pants. Like, all of a sudden Bulwark, who's the central figure, was not the focus of the drawing anymore, and that was bad. So the way I counterbalance that, and you'll see it on the final piece, I add really dark screen tones to that curtain in the background to push that curtain back. And then I also add a just slightly lighter than the curtain, but darker than Bulwark gray to his pants, to once again push those back from the viewer's eye. It doesn't mean that it looks like his legs are detached from his body or anything, but it lets the eye focus on the brighter part of the drawing to start. So those were my art considerations for this particular drawing. I do have an exciting last order of business to share with you, but before we get to that, I am just going to read you the blurb from Challenger Confidential number 1, Copper Knights and Granite Men, which is our Ascension epoch proper, not the medieval fantasized one. A pretentious, superpowered musician, an ageless techno-wizard, and a radioactive commando walk into a museum and find everyone turned to stone. Copper Knights and Granite Men is a witty and suspenseful superhero adventure that draws from the King in Yellow mythos and taps the secret occult history of North America. It's available on both Amazon.com, or you can start reading it free in its serialized edition on heroicadventurefiction.com, all one word, no spaces. Okay, so I'm holding my first contest. As you folks may have guessed, there's quite a few comic conventions and sci-fi conventions and the like that have been canceled this year or postponed. So I carry around 4x6 mini prints with me whenever I go to an event, and I generally give one free to anyone that buys a book, because it gives them something to flip through and look through and figure out which one they want, while Mike and I are doing things like signing their books and making change. Now that I have an abundance of mini prints and I don't know when I'm going to get to a con next, I figured you guys should get rewarded for that, so I'm going to hold a contest. I'm going to ask 2 questions at the end of this video, and you can pick one of the 2 questions and leave a reply to them in the comments. I will use a YouTube comment randomizer then to pick one of the comments from my video, and if that comment is answering one of the 2 questions that I'm going to ask, if you win, I will let you know by responding to your comment, so make sure that you check your comments after the date. I will be asking for your address, so if you are under 18, make sure you get your parents' permission before giving that to me. And I'm not keeping anyone's address for any reason. After I send out your mini prints, I am going to crumble it up and throw it away. The prize is 5 random mini prints. So 5 random 4x6 mini prints that represent all sorts of artwork I've done over the past, I think, 6 years. There's even fan art in there, and that's probably the only way that you can get a fan art print from me because I don't sell them. Alright, so the questions. These are either or, you only have to answer one. So, first question you can choose to answer: who is your favorite wrestler? It can be any wrestling society, any nationality, anything like that. Just who is your favorite wrestler? Or, tell us which one of your RPG characters died the fastest and how they met their demise. If you've been lucky enough to not have any characters meet their end in a tabletop role-playing game, then you can share the story of an unlucky friend. Okay, folks, thank you for choosing to spend your precious time watching this video. It means a lot to me. And stay safe and stay awesome, folks. Presto, over and out. Hey, you stuck around. I thought it would be fun to do a little comic haul video. I say my local comic shop is an hour away, but actually there is a comic shop that is very close to me now. It opened maybe 3 years ago or so, called Alchemist Cove, and that is a fine comic shop to go to if you like new comics, but they only have trades. Trades are pretty good, actually. And brand new comics, but I still like the old floppies, and a lot of things that I want to collect aren't in trade paperbacks. So as far as comics go, I tend to go further away. Alchemist Cove in Cressona, by the way, is a very fine game store, and they have game nights and everything, so that's great. But the store I consider my local comic store is Comic Masters in Allentown. It's actually pretty far away from here, but they have back issues, which is what I go to comic shops for. So, what did I pick up the last time I went to Comic Masters? Not this book. I owned this book already, but I often bring up Pat Broderick and Al Williamson on this channel, and they're both artists whose art I really love, and I would really love to get certain elements of how they draw into what I draw. So this is a fine example of Pat Broderick's work. He did the cover on Captain Atom number 40. He did not do the interiors. He did the interiors for a while and then switched to just doing the covers. But as you can see, this is a fine example of his drawing, and I wanted to get other issues that he did where he doesn't primarily draw people who are reflective in silver. So when I went to Comic Masters last, I picked up the Micronauts. This cover is by Bob Layton, not Pat Broderick, but this cover is by Pat Broderick, and Pat Broderick did the interiors. I want to say these were my first time picking up Micronauts comics. Micronauts wasn't hugely popular, but they were popular enough that I know quite a few people that read them, so I dove in. You can tell they're from the 80s, because check out this, striped stocking costume on this here gal. But these were really good. I really enjoyed the Micronauts comics. And it was really interesting to see these came before the Captain Atom issues, so these were a few years earlier in his career. And you know, I think his layouts are still awesome. I mean, look at that panel. That panel's great. And he's really good at being detail oriented, so having all the ants and stuff there just looks fantastic. But Pat Broderick was really well known for having characters with large eyes, and you could see the exaggerations there. This was before manga was very popular, so by today's large eye standards they aren't, but compared to American comic standards back then, they certainly were. So I picked up Micronauts. I really enjoyed them. Ant-Man is not part of the Micronauts. He's guest starring in this one, but it makes perfect sense because, you know. And then the other ones I picked up were Star Wars comics that Al Williamson worked on. And these were actually somewhat disappointing, I hate to say. I haven't actually read the entire story in this one, but this is interesting because it has a lot of heavy hitters as the artwork, as the artists. You've got Al Williamson, Tom Palmer, and Walt Simonson on it. So I haven't read this one yet, so I haven't gotten to dig into this one to really comment on it. But I will say that this comic was a disappointment. The art is by Al Williamson and Carlos Garzon, and the art itself is fine. The real problem that I have with it is the coloring. Some of the pages look alright, like these opening pages, but I feel like the coloring in most of the scenes, which are darker, really took away from the... You can't really appreciate the line work and the ink work. It just feels all muddied out. It's kind of hard to see what's going on. You know, I feel like this could have been, like, if you look at this as an example, this could have been really pretty to look at. It's ornate, it's detailed, and it just kind of gets muddied into everything with one tone. And a lot of scenes in the comic suffer from this. So that was really disappointing for me. I actually would love to see a black and white, one of those thick, cheap black and white paperbacks of this particular run, but since they're only 4-issue limited series, they wouldn't have any reason to make a cheap, thick trade paperback of that. So yeah. Not as happy about this one. Haven't checked this one out yet. Really happy with Micronauts. They're fun. They're, you know, not the world's absolute greatest comic, but they come from a time when you could pick up a single issue in the 80s of a Marvel comic and you'd be entertained and you'd get a full story. And I really appreciate those comics. I think the only 80s comics that I've ever read that I was really disappointed with are Defenders. But I guess that's a video in and of itself. So, yeah. Have a good day, folks. Or have an awesome day, folks. Presto. Over and out.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.